Chapter 13. I can only sleep with an alpha who's willing to give me a permanent mark. If you are enjoying these audio reads, please like and subscribe to the channel and most importantly share with other fans of the BL community. Hua Yong stood openly beside the bed, pressing and kneading Sheng Shaoyou's head, neck, spine, and back. With the generous application of massage oil, his hands glided smoothly along Sheng Shaoyou's vertebrae, counting them one by one. His slender fingers deliberately, or perhaps unintentionally, brushed over the prominent bump at the lowest point of the cervical spine, which was the spinous process of the seventh cervical vertebra. For both alphas and omegas, their most vulnerable glandular organ lay just beneath the skin covering that raised vertebra. The air in the room grew thick with the scent of orchids, blending with a deep woody fragrance that closely resembled Suishi, the most popular scent on the market. The aroma was so rich, it felt like stepping into a bustling flower market, and right there, pulsing gently beneath his palm, was the very source of that intoxicating fragrance, more alluring than Suishi or any other imitation of its scent. Hua Yong continued massaging for nearly 60 minutes, working from Sheng Shaoyou's head all the way down to his feet. Finally, he applied pressure near the Huantia acupoint, sending a wave of soreness and numbness through Sheng Shaoyou's body, making him let out a deep, heavy groan. Hua Yong immediately withdrew his hands and gently nudged Sheng Shaoyou's shoulder, lowering his voice, "Mr. Sheng, I'm done." Sheng Shaoyu sat up, his usually impeccable hair now a tousled mess, making him look far less intimidating and more approachable than usual. "That was pretty good," Sheng Shaoyu remarked. "Master Hua can now be officially certified." Hua Yong smiled, his hands glistening under the light with soft sheen, but even they couldn't outshine his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Sheng." Sheng Shaoyu suddenly wanted to kiss him again. He grasped Hua Yong's delicate, slender arm, pulling him closer. "What are you thanking me for?" "Thank you for letting me practice on you." Sheng Shaoyu chuckled. "It was my honor to be your subject." The four lips drew close once again, lingering in the mid-air just before fully connecting, like an unresolved thought or an unspoken sentiment. "How do you plan to thank me?" Hua Yong took the initiative once more. His delicate nose gently brushed against Sheng Shaoyou's cheek before he parted his lips and kissed him, the wet sounds of their kiss enough to make one's face flush and heart race. Where they separated, a shimmering silver thread still clung stubbornly between their lips. Hua Yong's pupils had darkened, the whites of his eyes taking on a faint blue hue under the light. Sheng Shaoyu pressed down on his shoulders, pushing him toward the massage bed. Caught off guard, Hua Yong staggered slightly, landing on the bed with an upturned face as he called out to him, "Mr. Sheng." The way he looked at Sheng Shaoyu ignited a fire in him, yet he couldn't rush, he didn't want to scare him. So, he simply let out a muffled "I'm going to wash my hands," Hua Yong said, pushing him away and standing up. His movements seemed slow, yet quick enough that Sheng Shaoyu couldn't catch him. By the time he returned, Sheng Shaoyu had already put on his robe and was leaning against the bed, flipping through the massage book and Hua Yong's carefully written note. "You've been studying pretty seriously." Hua Yong nodded, his expression equally serious as he said, "Since I've decided to do it, I have to see it through to the end and take it seriously." His lips were still a deep red. Sheng Shaoyu stared at those lips before him, which had been sucked into a deep red by himself, with an unreadable expression before asking, "Are you serious about kissing too?" Hua Yong's face flushed instantly. What about love?" Sheng Shaoyu asked casually, his tone unhurried. "What counts as serious? Does it have to be with marriage in mind?" Hua Yong's initially shy expression cooled down, returning to its usual calm. It was as if the thought of marrying Sheng Shaoyu had never even crossed his mind. His lips, still tinged crimson, pressed together slightly. Since he didn't know how to answer, he simply chose not to. Hua Yong was serious about everything he did. The cookies he baked himself were just as good as the ones sold outside. He didn't know how to give massages, but he was willing to learn diligently. And when it came to dating Sheng Shaoyu, he was just as earnest. They were serious about getting to know each other, serious about nurturing their relationship, and serious about starting from the most fundamental step, kissing, without crossing any lines. Sheng Shaoyu had initially worried that Hua Yong would take love too seriously, that he would need a definite conclusion, a final destination. That thought alone was enough to put pressure on Sheng Shaoyu, who had never considered marriage before. However, at this moment, not getting the answer he had expected, Sheng Shaoyu felt inexplicably displeased. It was as if, in the end, If Hua Yong refused to marry him, then Sheng Shaoyou, who had seriously committed himself to this relationship, would have suffered an enormous loss. That weekend, they made cocoa-flavored cookies together at home. But because they were too absorbed in kissing, they burned other batches. By the time the Sanardi batch was in the oven, Hua Yong crouched beside it, waiting. Sheng Shaoyou walked over and touched his face, and Hua Yong immediately became alert. Tilting his head up in a pleading manner, his voice soft as he said, "Mr. Sheng, we've used up all the cake flour and butter. If you keep this up, you won't have any cookies to eat." Sheng Shaoyou found him both frustrating and musing. "I can't even touch you, little." "No." Hua Yong gently pushed his hand away. "If you do that, I'll get distracted." Sheng Shaoyou, however, pretended not to hear. He wasn't interested in eating cookies at all. He just wanted to touch this orchid that could bake cookies. His fingers stubbornly brushed along Hua Yong's jawline, watching with satisfaction as even Hua Yong's neck turned pink. In low voice, he murmured, "Secretary Hua is so serious." Hua Yong kept his eyes fixed on the oven, not even lifting his head. "Mr. Sheng is too clingy and disobedient." "Is that so?" An arm wrapped around Hua Yong's shoulders, fingers reaching to the front to grasp his sharp, narrow chin, turning that beautiful face toward him, making him meet his gaze once more. He asked, "Am I really that clingy?" A faint glimmer of amusement flickered in Hua Yong's eyes. Very." Then he leaned in and kissed Sheng Shaoyou's lips, encouraging him, "You have to be a little more well-behaved." Having tasted something sweet, Sheng Shaoyou seemed to truly behave for a while, releasing him. He waited until the cookies were out of the oven before returning to being clingy. Shengfang Biotech's gene editing technology with CRISPR had yet to make any progress, but the research team's days became noticeably better. Because Sheng Shaoyou's mood had been exceptionally good lately, so good that it felt as if he could grant amnesty to the entire world. Even when an utterly tactless business partner came to negotiate while wearing Suiji perfume, Sheng Shaoyou didn't make things difficult for him and generously signed the contract. Chen Pinming quietly observed, determined to uncover the secret behind his boss's good mood. Eventually, he found the key, Hua Yong. Sheng Shaoyou seemed particularly fixated on the secretary from HS, Hua Yong. Their interactions were so frequent that it left people astonished. Every morning before the daily meeting, Sheng Shaoyou would talk to Hua Yong on the phone for about 5 minutes. During lunch break, he would spend more than half an hour video chatting with Hua Yong. In the evening, he would talk to Hua Yong on the phone for 15 minutes on his way home, which was Hua Yong's place. If it weren't for the fact that this suave and wealthy civil alpha was the largest individual shareholder of Shengfang and its current actual controller, Chen Pinming would have started to suspect that Sheng Shaoyou had been completely won over by HS young and beautiful Mega. In truth, Sheng Shaoyou wished Hua Yong would win him over a little faster. Hua Yong would blush while kissing him and, in moments of heated passion, would even use his hands to help Sheng Shaoyou find release. He would turn red the instant he caught a whiff of Sheng Shaoyou's pheromones, but he simply refused to take that final step with him. Sheng Shaoyou wasn't someone obsessed with physical intimacy, but it was only natural for an adult alpha to desire an Omega. Hua Yong's repeated rejections left Sheng Shaoyou somewhat annoyed. One time, that orchid struggled a bit too much, and Sheng Shaoyou lost his patience completely. He snapped, "Every day you come home smelling like Shen Wenlang, but when it comes to me, I can't even touch you." Hua Yong's face instantly went deathly pale. "Mr. Sheng," he said, "President Shen and I are just ordinary colleagues." The Omega gritted his teeth, his expression carrying the humiliation of a virtuous woman being mistaken for a prostitute. "I'm his secretary. It's inevitable that, after spending a long time around him, I'll carry his scent. If it bothers you, I'll shower as soon as I get home from now on. But don't make it sound like I'm—" Hua Yong's voice choked off. He bit his lip, looking at Sheng Shaoyou as if he couldn't bring himself to say the rest. Seeing the expression, Sheng Shaoyou found himself unable to stay angry. His tone softened. "I'm not saying there's anything between you and Shen Wenlang. But why won't you even let me touch you?" The Omega closed his eyes in pain. "I have pheromone imbalance disorder. I'm still undergoing treatment. The doctor said intimate activities are prohibited, unless—" He suddenly stopped speaking. Sheng Shaoyou frowned. "Unless what?" "It's nothing." "Hua Yong." Sheng Shaoyou's expression darkened. I want to hear the truth. Unless you're willing to permanently mark me, Hua Yong said, his eyes tightly shut, his eyelashes trembling. I can only sleep with an alpha who's willing to give me a permanent mark. A permanent mark? Sheng Shaoyou let out a cold laugh. Does this orchid even understand what he's saying? A permanent mark meant entrusting one's life to another. It was a commitment even more serious than marriage. Just for the sake of sleeping together, this Omega dared to dream of having Sheng Shaoyou permanently mark him? What a ridiculous joke. Sheng Shaoyou fell silent, his expression dark and unreadable, his gaze cold. Fortunately, Hua Yong didn't seem to have any expectations himself. After speaking, he merely let out a self-mocking laugh. But how could that ever be possible? You're Mr. Sheng, after all. That attitude seemed to suggest he was certain Sheng Shaoyou wasn't serious about him, that this was nothing more than a game. And yet, Hua Yong was still willing to offer up his sincerity and accompany him in this game. Sheng Shaoyou grew even more displeased. The reprimand on the tip of his tongue was swallowed back as he caught sight of the clear tears slowly welling up from the base of those trembling, butterfly wing-like eyelashes. Hua Yong slowly leaned into him, burying his face against Sheng Shaoyou's chest. I'm not that greedy. Things are already good as they are. His tears left Sheng Shaoyou unable to utter a single harsh word. The tall and strikingly handsome young alpha stood there, at a complete loss, before letting out a sigh. He wrapped his arms around the trembling figure in his embrace, lightly patting his back in soothing gesture. Don't overthink it. But in his heart, he thought, let's just see where things go. He, Sheng Shaoyou, had no shortage of Omegas willing to stay by his side without being marked, without any title or status. Having one more delicate orchid wouldn't make a difference. So it was best not to force him. Sheng Shaoyou had never considered himself a deeply devoted or sentimental man. What he liked today, he might not like tomorrow. Although this orchid did suit his taste, who knew how long this bland and insipid relationship would last? He decided to take it one step at a time. In the blink of an eye, another 2 months passed. Having been accustomed to rich and lavish meals, Sheng Shaoyou found that eating plain porridge with simple side dishes wasn't as easy to grow tired of as he had expected. His relationship with Hua Yong had lasted much longer than he had imagined. Spring was nearly over, yet Sheng Shaoyou was still in this pure and chaste relationship with Hua Yong, one that was solely limited to just kissing. That evening, when he got home from work, Hua Yong wasn't there. Earlier at noon, Hua Yong had told him that he had a gathering tonight and wouldn't be back until after dinner. Sheng Shaoyou sat in the living room for a while, growing increasingly aware of the empty space around him and the unbearable loneliness it brought. He sent Hua Yong a message, asking, "When are you coming home?" Hua Yong was probably busy. He didn't reply. Sheng Shaoyou sat on the sofa, staring at the scattered lights outside the window, and suddenly felt like a husband waiting for his career-focused wife to return home from social engagement. The thought amused him. It was one thing to be in a relationship as innocent as an elementary schoolboy's. But when had he started acting like a stay-at-home husband? Sheng Shaoyou stood up and replied to Li Baiqiao, who had messaged him an hour ago, then drove himself to Tiandihui. At 1:30 a.m., Sheng Shaoyou returned home, reeking of alcohol. Originally, he had planned to go back to his own place, but the driver who had come to pick him up didn't ask and simply assumed he'd be returning to Hua Yong's place. Sheng Shaoyou noticed this midway through the ride but didn't correct him. Hua Yong seemed to be asleep. After pressing the doorbell twice, he finally came to open the door, his eyes red. But his face showed no signs of drowsiness, only the redness in his eyes stood out. Sheng Shaoyou had drunk a lot. He had also done some things with the newly met Omega, things that adults do. Upon seeing him, Hua Yong twitched his nose slightly. The moment he caught the unfamiliar Omega scent, his eyes turned even redder. The driver helped Sheng Shaoyou into the house, and Hua Yong stepped aside to make way, not saying a single word the entire time.